Hello and welcome to this presentation regarding teacher credential verification. My name is Braden Walters from the Office of Educator Excellence. I'm going to be going over some appropriate placement guidance today. Also with us is Caitlin Groom from the Center for Educational Performance and Information, going to be going over some reporting information. And also Caitlin Hensbach from the Office of Financial Management, who's going to be providing some information on auditing implications to consider moving into the 2022-2023 school year. You may notice that it's a little different if you watched it live. Had some technical difficulties during the live presentation, so re-recording the appropriate placement portion after the fact, same presentation, same information, but without the technical difficulties. I'd also like to apologize to both Caitlins for cutting out their introduction from the original presentation. Also in attendance was Brian Solaski and Jessica Beagle from the Michigan Department of Education. So first, we're going to look at the purpose of appropriate placement, and that is to assure every Michigan pupil has access to properly trained educators. I really want to stress that any decision, any requirement from MDE really comes back to what's going to be best for Michigan students, as well as best for Michigan educators. At the same time, we understand that districts are facing a nationwide teacher shortage, having real difficulty staffing their positions, and from that comes flexibilities, comes permits, authorizations, approvals, things that the MDE provides districts to staff the classroom with sort of the next best individual if somebody with a valid Michigan teaching certificate in the content area is not available for the assignment. So the first thing you want to ask if you're ever going to staff a course is, are there special considerations or funding for the course? So is it a special ed course, right? They have specific guidance around how to staff special education programs. Is it a title funded program or course? Is it a career and technical education? Early childhood. Virtual in general are going to be what we're going over today. So I'll click through the rest of the slides briefly. I won't be presenting on those, but today we'll be only going over general and virtual placement. So again, special education, specific guidance you can look to. Title funded courses also. Virtual, that's something we're going to go over. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this slide because I have a specific slide for it later on. Career and technical education is something to consider. Early childhood and the type of early childhood program that you're looking at. And then there's general. So a question that we get quite a bit from districts is, how do I staff this course? Here's the title, right? Here's what we're calling it. What endorsements required? And there are a few questions that we're going to go over that you can ask to really make sure that you're appropriately staffing that position. So again, we always want to look to special considerations and funding first. Consult the other guidance, the specific guidance, if there's a special consideration in play. So special education's one, career and technical education, ESL bilingual is another one to consider. Always consult that guidance if the course falls under that consideration. Today we're talking about general though. So is the course being used to meet any state specified credit or academic standard requirement, right? Any curriculum requirement. And this is really a tool that districts can use to assure that they're appropriately staffing a classroom. So if you have a class that is being used to, let's say, issue, a social studies credit, you need a social studies teacher, right? If it's a science credit that's being issued or a curriculum requirement that's being met, science certified teacher. If you're using a course to, let's say, issue 2 credits, right? Let's say social studies science, you need a social studies and science certified teacher, or a co-teaching model where one teacher holds social studies, one teacher holds science. So it really is quite easy if you look to the curriculum requirement or credit that's being issued to appropriately staff that course. Pretty straightforward. You can look to MCL 380 1278A and B. You can also look at curriculum requirements and standards that are laid out by the Michigan Department of Education when staffing these classrooms. I want to make sure that everyone's aware that we're not talking about how credit is issued in any way. That's a separate conversation. We will never tell you that you cannot issue credit based on how a teacher is certified. We will never ever take away credit because the teacher was not appropriately certified. We're talking about how to avoid salary deductions in cases where a teacher is not appropriately placed in a course that's being used to meet a specific curriculum requirement. And let's say you say, I have a course that's not meeting any of these, right? It's a fun elective. An elective could be used to meet these, but this elective is not, right? It's just a course that's being taken in addition to, let's say, diploma requirements. The question will then be, is an endorsement offered for the course? And again, we don't really look at the title, we want to look at the content, right? The content is what's being covered. That's what the teacher needs to hold the proper training in. So if an endorsement is ever offered, you can look at the courses that can be taught document to verify if an endorsement is offered that matches with the content, staff it with the corresponding endorsement. If the endorsement has been discontinued, the courses that can be taught document will detail that. Or if you do have a course that does not fall under any of the endorsements that we offer, that's when you can staff the course with an individual who holds a valid Michigan teaching certificate with an endorsement at the grade level of the course being offered, and can demonstrate to the district that they hold the content knowledge to be assigned to the course. And aside from understanding which endorsement is required for a course, districts also are finding it increasingly difficult to staff these courses. We hear more and more from the field that a district has posted the position and hasn't gotten any qualified applicants. So that's when districts can look to permits, they can look to authorizations, they can look to approvals to staff these positions when they cannot find a Michigan certified teacher who's available for the assignment. For permits, there are 3 full-year options districts can utilize. There's the full-year basic sub-permit. If it's 0.5 or less FTE, you always want to first look to the expert and shortage permit to see if you have a staff member that qualifies. If not, then you can look to that full-year option. But that's a way that districts can staff assignments immediately with somebody who might not hold that Michigan endorsement that corresponds with the content of the course. Authorizations are another thing to look to. The annual career authorization can be issued. It's a CTE credential, and it can be used in a general assignment. So a general endorsement cannot be used in a CTE funded assignment, but a CTE credential can be used in both a CTE and a general assignment. So woodworking is an example. I've talked to a lot of districts that have maybe an industrial arts teacher that's retiring. They can't get an individual from the field who holds an industrial arts endorsement. And again, you can look to the permits. If somebody's willing to work towards a program, the full year permit would be the best option. Or also, there's an annual career authorization. Maybe you have a community member that can qualify for that authorization with the woodworking SIP code, and you can use them to staff that assignment. Approvals, special ed approvals is also an option for districts that are having difficulty staffing their special education assignments. On the note of not being able to get qualified applicants, we're really encouraging districts to get more creative with their job postings. So typically when we talk to districts, they'll say, I'm posting for a Michigan certified teacher with the endorsement that coincides with the course. And that's good, right? That should be the preferred individual you're looking for in the job posting. But we're encouraging districts to also look for individuals that might qualify for a permit, for an authorization, for an approval, for an interim teaching certificate. So also encourage any individual with a bachelor's degree that's maybe not even teaching related to apply, who's willing to enroll in an alternative route program. Encourage somebody with 60 or more semester credit hours who can pass if it's a core area or has a major in the area, the corresponding test, that's willing to apply and work towards a program under a full year basic permit. You can get them in the door right away. And authorizations, approvals are also tools that districts can use when posting for positions. So trying to move districts away from just posting for that Michigan cert, with the corresponding endorsement. Start getting creative with these postings and post for individuals who are willing to work under an interim certificate, a permit, an authorization, or an approval while working towards getting a Michigan teaching certificate. All right, so we're going to take a quick second here. We're going to beat the dead horse on how to determine what endorsements are required for a specific assignment. So again, which endorsements are required? I get this question all the time. Here's the title. Title doesn't tell us much. We want to look at the content of the course. Is it generally funded? Is a question we'll ask if you come to us. If the answer is no, we're going to tell you consult that specific guidance, right? Consult special ed guidance, CTE, ESL bilingual. Look to that specific guidance. If it is a generally funded course, we want to know if it's meeting any specific curriculum requirement, right? Are you issuing any specific credit for that course? If the answer is yes, it should be pretty straightforward, right? You need an endorsement that corresponds with whatever curriculum requirement is being met or credit is being issued, right? Math would be a math certified teacher. If it's a history class, history certified teacher, or a social studies, right? You need somebody with that corresponding endorsement. If not, it might not be as straightforward, right? It's a fun elective. Again, electives can be used to meet a curriculum requirement, but this one's not, right? It's a fun elective. You want to ask, is an endorsement offered, right? So if an endorsement is offered that aligns with the content of that elective, then staff it with the corresponding endorsement, right? You can look to the courses that can be taught doc to see if an endorsement is offered. Staff it with that after reviewing the curriculum or the guidance, the content of the course. If an endorsement is not offered, a grade level certified teacher may be assigned. So if no curriculum requirements being met and no endorsement is offered for the course, grade level certification is required, and the teacher has to demonstrate to the district that they have the content knowledge to teach that course. And now looking to virtual. So there have been some changes to virtual placement requirements over the past few years, and we really want to drive home that it's really become the same as, if not very similar to, in-person placement, and that each virtual course that a student is taking needs to have a Michigan certified teacher for the subject and the grade level of the course being offered. Obviously, it is not realistic to have one teacher assigned, right? If you have 20 kids taking 20 subjects, either have, one teacher assigned to one or a few of those kids, or have one person who's monitoring those students who holds all of those endorsements for the courses that students are taking. So now we're going to move into some options that districts have for staffing these assignments. One option districts could utilize is selecting courses from the Michigan statewide catalog for virtual courses. You could look to that to offer virtual classes for students. Another option you have is working with a third-party provider that doesn't only provide canned software, but also provides a Michigan subject and grade level certified teacher with each of the courses that they offer. Another option that we see less often, but is an option, would be working with other districts, other LEAs, working with an ISD to offer a course with a subject and grade level certified teacher that students who are attending local districts throughout the ISD or with the partnering LEAs can enroll in those courses. I'd also like to go over some changes to 21F, or a change rather. So previously, the previous year, what districts are familiar with is that if they were working with a third-party vendor who was providing them with Michigan certified teachers for the subject and grade level, districts were still being advised to apply for a full year basic substitute permit for those individuals to maintain compliance with the direct hire law. So you'd be getting, let's say from a vendor who's offering you a science course, a Michigan science certified teacher, districts were still pulling that full year basic permit to maintain compliance with this law in science, the same area the teacher was certified. Third-party vendors is being included in 21F, being added to it. So I believe it's 14D. So moving forward, districts do not need to apply for a full year basic sub permit if a third-party vendor for virtual courses is also offering or providing a Michigan certified teacher for the subject and grade level of the course offered. No more full year basic permit needed if that third-party vendor is providing Michigan certified teachers subject and grade level. Lastly, I'd like to go over a flexibility that's still in place. So if you have an alternative education virtual learning lab that's defined in the PAM, the Pupil Accounting Manual, you may still staff that with a Michigan grade level certified teacher. So you can have a class of students. It needs to be staffed with a Michigan certified teacher who holds any endorsement at the grade level of those students. And that flexibility is still in place for alternative education virtual learning labs as defined in the Pupil Accounting Manual. I'd also like to draw district's attention to the revised certification structure that we're moving to. I'm not going to go into great detail on the placement implications in this slide. There is a QR code that's been included in the top right side of this slide, so you can pull out your smartphone and scan that for a YouTube video that details placement under the revised certification structure, but definitely want to make sure districts are aware of this moving forward. One thing I would like to call out is that this revised certification structure will not affect endorsements or placement implications for endorsements that were issued prior to the revision of the certification structure. So we've had a few districts reach out to us with current endorsements, especially the K through 5 all subjects, K through 8 self-contained, and asking, right, how does this affect how I can place this certified individual? The answer is it does not affect that. If an individual holds an endorsement that was issued prior to the revision of the certification structure, there are no changes in how that individual can be placed. And lastly would be any placement questions that districts have. You can reach out to mde-educatorhelp@michigan.gov. You can reach out to me directly, waltersb2@michigan.gov. We'll be happy to answer those questions for you. If you didn't watch the live presentation, nothing to worry about. We didn't go over any live questions at this point in the presentation. So any questions, districts are encouraged to reach out to mde-educatorhelp@michigan.gov or myself, waltersb2@michigan.gov. Again, we'll be happy to provide clarification. Up next in the presentation, we have some reporting information coming from Caitlin Groom from CEPI.
All right.
Right. So from all of that information and kind of the guidance that Braden was giving around how to determine if an educator or what the requirements of that educator are, we at the state have 3 primary systems that are being used to determine if the kind of tying in that educator and their credential.
Lost you.
Okay, I think I got muted. So within the state system, we're really thinking about connecting that credential. What credential does the educator have? Within the rep, we are able to identify what is the educator instructing. And then within the TSDL, we can answer the question of what is the content of the course. And ideally, those 3 things will be aligned to really meet that true appropriate placement question and determine if it is appropriate placement. And so these are questions to the right that the state is able to answer. That question of is this appropriate placement really falls within the local district. So if you'll give me one more click, Braden. So that question of is this appropriate placement really is within the local district. We can provide tools at the state level and really look at those aggregate data sets and try to make some best guesses. But all of those nuances that Braden was discussing regarding the funding and different requirements depending on the type of program or exceptions that are in place for particular educational programs, we aren't able to capture all of those at a meaningful and right time to be able to truly assist in determining ultimately if the educator is appropriately placed. So moving forward, so asking the question of is this appropriate placement really will fall back on all of that guidance that Braden was discussing. What is the content of the course? What are the funding streams impacted? What is the student or who is the student that's being educated? Are there any extenuating circumstances within the district that allow for additional flexibilities? So again, really thinking about is this appropriate placement? The MDE really can only provide the guidance and audit of what is best practice. CEPI is responsible for doing the data collection and reporting of that. So MDE is telling you what you should do. You are telling CEPI what you have done, and then we're giving you some data reports back of what you have told us. And then again, that determining of appropriate placement really will fall within the local district. Knowing what type of credit the course is for, all of those funding and kind of those nuances that really define appropriate placement are not transparent in our state data at this time. So based on the compiled laws, program requirements, and admin rules, those really create the definition of what appropriate placement is. And then it's ultimately up to our local districts and ISDs to provide that information of, yes, this educator is appropriately placed or not. I have you click forward. So when we're talking about the rep reporting, we really are thinking, and in terms of appropriate placement, we're really thinking about that teacher of record. And the teacher of record is defined within the pupil accounting manual, not within the rep collection. Within the rep collection, you are reporting the content-specific assignment for each and every course that the educator is acting as that teacher of record for. And those have a set instructional assignment code range of 00AX through the 599s. Those include the CTE codes as well. There's a link to the rep data field descriptions that includes all of those kind of categories of employee or assignments and all of the available assignment codes there as well. Within the TSDL, we're making that connection between the teacher of record and the assignment code based on the PIC number. So every educator that you're reporting within the rep has that assigned PIC number. For each of those specific content areas that the educator is being reported with within the rep, we do expect to see corresponding student courses, except for dual enrollment where there's a post-secondary instructor. So really creating that tie between the content of the course, which is defined in TSDL at the granular level in the SCED codes, tying that back to the assignment. If you're familiar with the TSDL collection, you know that that is happening right now. So that is, we're in the post collection window for the 21-22 school year for the TSDL collection. And all of your rep reporting has already happened for that same school year. So it's really important that the rep data is matching that content of the course rather than the endorsements that they hold. On the last slide I showed you, we know what credentials they hold, that's in MOEX. So if your district is reporting the endorsement codes that the individual holds within rep, that is a problem. It will likely not align to the student course codes that are defined in the rep crosswalk, also linked there. And I'm going to talk more about that, I promise. The other kind of category of instructors that is reported within the rep, and everyone is reported within the rep if they're working in your district on a regular and continuous basis. But in terms of that appropriate placement, we're really thinking about our teachers and that instructional staff. So substitutes become important. When we're thinking about substitutes in terms of how they should be reported within the rep, if they are truly a day-to-day or intermittent sub that is being placed in different classrooms, potentially the same classroom for less than 90 days, and there is another teacher of record, the actual official teacher of record, meeting that definition as prescribed in the pupil accounting manual, that individual should be reported within the rep with the day-to-day sub assignment code, which is 00 sub. In that case, for the intermittent day-to-day, the true day-to-day subbing, there should not be any TSDL student courses that include that educator's PIC or that individual's PIC number. They are not acting as teacher of record if they are filling in for less than 90 days. They are not meeting that definition and likely don't have the credential to fill that role. If they are not doing those things, if there's not a teacher of record attached to the course, even if it's less than 90 days, there still needs to be an official teacher of record attached to every course. And so if they are filling in as the teacher of record in those courses, they are reported as the teacher of record with that content-specific assignment code within the rep collection, and they are also reported in the TSDL collection as a teacher of record. Within the TSDL, you can add multiple PIC numbers so that if there are staffing changes throughout the year, you can reflect that by applying the multiple teacher of record PICs. So one of the things that CEPI has been working on over the past, I'd say about year with MDE is really trying to determine how we can best support districts in the review of educators' assignments to their credentials. Many years ago, we created the Teacher Credential Verification Report, and this was developed within the MSDS system. So that's our student data system. And it was placed there because it is an audit function, and we have auditors that have access to the MSDS. So this is available to all of your MSDS district users. So it will take a little bit of coordination to get there. The other option is to add a view within your My Login profile to the MSDS to be able to access this report. What the Teacher Credential Verification Report does is it takes your active rep collection or your rep collection there for your school district, and then pulls in all of the educators that are reported with those instructional teaching like assignments, and then connects that to their MOEX credential. So what we have done with that is lots of updates to kind of streamline the endorsement level mapping and try to assist in providing a tool that can be helpful for the increased level of review that districts and auditors are going to be responsible for. So the report itself is fairly easy to get through too. I do see there's a note that it's been the case for a long time. I think it's about maybe about this, but while we're talking about that, this report is housed in MSDS. The report does, or the rep system does not have as updated of technology. So this is one of the areas that we will definitely be improving as we are looking at system redesigns. And next. So kind of overall in terms of the report, there are some visual changes, but primarily there is kind of more of the back end changes that you won't necessarily see when you pull up the report. So what we have done with the Teacher Credential Verification Report is made it available on demand. So it used to be available only based on your fall collection, and it was available in January. So it was determined that that was just a little too late for you all to make use of this report, knowing that we have that student count day confirmation of valid credentials. So we have expanded it to not only look at the fall collection, but also the end of year rep collections, so that throughout the year you can actively monitor or better monitor your educators' credentials and that appropriate placement pieces. With that, we do have the rep on demand, which allows for early and often data submissions into the rep. So when you have staff changes, when you have educators that are filling in for various assignments throughout the year, we know that by the time the end of year collection happens, a lot of times those pieces are kind of missed or forgotten about because it happened so long ago. Those are things that can be added all throughout the year now to the rep collection to ensure that when that rep data is finalized at the end of the year, we really have that full picture of all of the placements and assignments that that educator was associated with. We have also done a mapping of assignment codes to endorsements that has been used to kind of do a cursory appropriate placement check, and that resulted in a field or a column being added for in and out of field status, and I'll talk about what that means in just a moment. We also added an expired credential column to be able to flag. So the idea with both of these columns that were added is that we are trying to give you like a very easy way to look and identify the kind of most egregious or the ones that look most suspicious to us. but this will not be the audit tool. So this report will not be the end of your process. It's really a starting point to then dig into all of those nuances that Braden was talking about, and we'll walk through some of the questions that you should be asking yourself while looking at this. The also used to be limited to the kind of traditional credential types. We have expanded those to include all of the permits and kind of standardized flexibilities that MDE is offering. So there should be less records flagged because of those flexibilities. So we've expanded that net of where we're looking for appropriate placement. And then, as I mentioned, added that column for the expired credential. So we're trying to give you really quick tools so that throughout the year, at a glance, you have an easier way to identify those that may have missed a renewal, or the things that would result in an FTE or salary deduction kind of earlier, and without having to connect all the resources yourself. So when you look at the report and there is a yes in the expired credential column, that will be the way you're answering, is this credential expired? But the next question you should be asking is if it matters. So in this case, when we're looking at the record for Ashley Moore, we can see that the on leave column has a status of no. They have an active assignment code. There's a valid certificate type. But on this, I can see that expiration date is a year behind. So that is an indication that this credential is actually expired and that they may have missed a renewal. If you click again, if you look at that expiration date and the expiration date is in the future, or it's in the past, so let's say that we find that this credential is expired. The next question that we should be asking ourselves is this employee actually teaching in our district? So are they on loan or leave? Are they no longer employed in the district? Those are things that would impact the action that you will take. So that's why I'm saying that this report is a great starting tool, but it will not be the end of your investigations. So in this case, with that second line of data, we see that they do have an expired credential. However, they were reported with the on leave status in the rep with their funded position status code. So if you have an employee on leave and they are not actively educating, then that may be one that you can kind of worry about later. If they are returning to the district, or plan to return in January, it would be a good opportunity for you to reach out to them and say, hey, I noticed while you are on leave, you've missed renewing your certificate. Before you come back, we'll need you to take care of that. And then if you click again, to determine if they were terminated in that collection, we have provided the date of termination. So again, if you see that yes in the expired credential column, check the on leave, check the date of termination, and these are provided directly from the rep collection. So if you get to this point in your investigation and it's still looking like that top row where they're not reported as on leave and there is no date of termination, then the question is, should they be? And if the rep data is not reported accurately, then this report will not be able to be as useful as it could be. So if you are not accurately reporting funded position status or termination dates and codes, you will have extra educators included on this list that could potentially flag expired credentials, in and out of field status, that aren't actually kind of value added to your process because they are not with your district. So really ensuring that the rep collection has that accurate data will ensure that this report is able to be as helpful as possible. So the expired piece is pretty straightforward. I think that based on what I've heard from all of you and all of our stakeholders, I think that expired or not is pretty straightforward. And I think that where the angst starts to build is when we talk about that assignment to endorsements. So as I mentioned, within our state data systems, to truly be able to determine that appropriate placement, we really need that student course along with the rep assignment code that then ties to the endorsement codes and guidance that is produced around courses that can be taught. So when we're talking about several different resources that have guidance and could be misleading if you're not tying them all together. So when you are looking at your local courses, all of those courses are being reported within the TSDL with an applicable SCED code. And that's the kind of national set of student course codes for educational data. So in my example here, we're looking at an art appreciation class. It gives a description of the class that can help you determine if that is the right SCED code based on what's actually kind of occurring within the class. Again, we are not marking if this is for an art credit or for an elective credit or what part of curriculum and standards this is meeting. So we still don't have that piece. And so really determining that appropriate SCED code is going to come back to the local district and ensure that the SCED description is the most closely aligned to what is being instructed in the class. Within the SCED framework, we have gone through and made determinations about what rep assignment codes best are aligned to those content of courses. So in the top left corner, we have our student course. This is a screenshot from the rep crosswalk that takes the SCED code and provides the recommended assignment code. So you can see here that the recommended assignment code is that 000LX for visual art. When you look in the rep assignment code tables or in the data field descriptions, under the arts, we see that visual art is 000LX, so that makes sense. So as long as if you are teaching this course and you have an art appreciation class, as long as your educator is being reported with that 000LX in the rep, we will consider that aligned for rep and TSDL connections. And remember that that's happening at the very end of the school year. So I really recommend that you all are doing this mapping early and ensuring that you are really focusing on those courses that your districts actually offer and ensuring that your educators have the assignment codes that are aligned to the SCED codes that the students will be being reported with. So, as I mentioned, we're not done because we haven't talked about endorsements at all. When we're thinking about how to tie the endorsements back in, the document that Braden had referenced earlier is called the Courses That Can Be Taught document. It takes the endorsement area. In this example, I used art education or visual arts. It lists out the codes, and that does include historical codes and ones that have been discontinued. So essentially what has been done is we took all of the assignment codes and mapped them to the endorsement codes, just like this Courses That Can Be Taught document is doing, but made it kind of referenceable for the report. So even if you report, or if you report your art appreciation teacher with the visual art assignment code of 000LX, and that individual holds the LZ endorsement, that will map in our report as in field because it is listed as one of the allowable endorsement codes that is allowed for the content of that course. So through making these kind of three connections, we can get back to the LZ being the actual instructor of the art appreciation course, but it's going through a couple of transformations to get there. And all of those nuances about what the course is actually instructing and where the funding is and all of those pieces are not available at the time that you would be reviewing this report. So instead of making you all do each of these pieces, like I mentioned, we have automated that assignment code to the courses that can be taught document to provide that in or out of field status on the report itself. Go ahead. Oh, you can just keep clicking these for him. There we go. Okay. So as I mentioned, we're talking about really connecting that assignment to endorsement. We are not talking about the content of the course yet. That is all happening in your local system before the rep is being reported. So again, I have a couple tips about really taking that crosswalk and customizing it locally. But that will really assist in ensuring that when you first run this report this fall, you don't see out of field for educators that truly are appropriately placed. So when we think about the overarching goal of appropriate placement, we know that students should have access to appropriately qualified educators. In order for us to monitor that and to assist you in monitoring that, educators need to have accurate assignments that are aligned to the appropriate credentials as required. So when we're looking at this example here, we can see the assignment code that is being pulled from REP that I reported with. They have grades and ed settings of 9, 10, 11, and 12. That's also being pulled from REP. So they are teaching math, any math. So again, we're not quite to the content yet. It could be geometry or algebra or any of the maths. We get to that level once we pull in that TSDL information. So the assignment code and grades are then mapped in a very advanced lookup table that does all of the one-to-many relationships that are documented in that courses that can be taught document, and gives a starting point or at least a recommendation of if they appear to be in or out of field. So on this example, you can see they have the PE for 8 through K8, and math is not within that range. When you get to any of these questions, there is not one straight answer or question that you should be asking yourself. All of those nuances that Braden was mentioning before are the things that will need to be determined at this level. So does the course require content endorsement? Are all of the assignments properly reflected for the courses? Is the assignment code aligned to the course? So going back to that crosswalk, if we had an art appreciation course and we were reporting a different assignment code other than that 000LX, that might not be the right assignment code for the course. Are all of the assignments included? So if they're teaching, separate courses or at different buildings, it's important that all of those assignments are reflected to ensure that the tool can be used for each of those assignments. Also looking at the grades and ed settings, especially if you have had building reorgs or kind of shifting of school populations. A lot of times we see that the rep data is not updated to include those updates. So if you move your 5th grade from your elementary school building to your middle school. Maybe the building code needs to be updated or the grades so that it can appear to be appropriate. Another question to ask is if the educator is actually acting as the teacher of record. If you have folks here that are appearing to be out of their field, it may be that there is an actual teacher of record. They may be filling in that intermittent day-to-day sub role, and there is an actual teacher of record associated with the course. If all of the data is accurate for rep and the rep is reflective of everything that they're doing, and they still appear to be out of field for that placement, it's possible that the district may need to apply for one of the flexibility options and permit flexibilities to ensure that that educator is appropriate for the course. And then my kind of last question to kind of have in the back of your mind when you're looking at this is really to ensure that all educators are reported. If you're not reporting somebody within the rep system, then they will be dropped from this report. So, you know, I know that we have had many educators that end up being missed for one reason or another. So really ensuring that your rep is reflective of anyone who has been employed as that teacher of record role is accurately reported with the correct assignment data. So I know that that seems super overwhelming, and I gave a very straightforward answer or example of in and out of place. So one of the things that I want to recommend for all of you to take a look at now is not right now, because Caitlin is going to be following me with very important information. But when we're done here, if you have not reviewed your qualified teaching staff reports on the My School data site, which is part of the parent dashboard, I would really recommend that you take a look at each of your buildings there. To get to it, it's in the top menu, so www.myschooldata.com, and then parent dashboard, you'll enter in the name of the school, and then under staff data on the bottom is qualified teaching staff. And this is a screenshot of what that report looks like. So this report uses the exact same rules of mapping those assignments to endorsement codes that have been applied to the report within the MSDS. And so this will be a good way for you to see how your district has been reporting, identify any kind of data reporting issues versus true placement issues. What I like about this report is that it gives the breakdown by subject area. So this is looking at all subjects right now, but that is a drop down. So you can look at like your English department or math department by building to determine what percentage of qualified staff you're meeting. So looking at the statewide average for last year, you can see that across the board, 93% of the educators that were reported within the rep had the appropriate credentials through credential or certificates or permits or any of those flexibilities that allowed them to be appropriate. So across the state, we're truly talking about 7% of the population that would appear to be out of their appropriate placement kind of range. So I know it sounds like when we're saying that you have to look at all of the endorsements and assignments, it sounds scary, but a lot of these things are already happening. So with the increase of TSDL collection being back to for all students, we know that that definitely has an impact on the rep collection. And ensuring kind of forces us to be thinking about these things ahead. So also to assist with this fall, CEPI will be sending out additional data quality checks that are comparing your full year TSDL and full year rep collections to identify any of those kind of problematic areas where the content of the course, the SCED code that's being used, maybe isn't the most appropriate based on the assignment code or vice versa. So really looking at the trends of how your district has been submitting data to really help assist with, again, those data reporting issues that may appear as placement issues. So I do see the question, what data quality reports are going out again? So we are looking at rep TSDL data quality checks that can be sent to you all as kind of a pre-school year check. So it will be coming out this fall. I don't have a specific date yet. In the meantime, I would highly recommend looking at the rep crosswalk that is available on the CEPI webpage, www.michigan.gov/CEPI, under the rep resources under help and training. I believe it's also on the TSDL website. The rep crosswalk is an Excel file that lists out over 1,700 SCED codes that are the standardized codes that your district is reporting for the student courses. What I would recommend doing with that is cut out any of the courses that your district does not offer. There are a lot of courses that most districts likely are not offering, such as like Portuguese 4. If you're not offering foreign language classes for Portuguese in like a 1 or 2, it's unlikely that you will have Portuguese 4. If you don't teach Portuguese at all, just cut all of those SCED codes out so that you don't have to deal with as much clutter kind of dealing with that alignment piece for your educators. So if you can align the SCED list to your actual courses offered within your district, that will really cut down on the number of courses that you're having to review or look at. Because the SCEDs are a national course code catalog, there are very few changes with them from year to year. And if anything, there's typically additional codes added rather than removed. What I would recommend doing with that after you have cut out all of the courses that your district does not offer is really looking in and honing in on those recommended rep assignment codes and ensuring that any of the courses that your district is offering, that you have a solid understanding of what those assignment codes that we expect to see within the rep are. And then from there, ensuring that your fall and end of year collections have all of those appropriate assignment codes that are aligned to the SCED so that the reporting tool that we are providing can provide the most accurate information. And that the teacher credential report, again, it will be a very useful tool, but it is only as useful as the quality of the data. So it really is important that that we have that transparency of assignment code reporting, because we are missing that student content piece until the very end of the year. So being able to do some proactive review and planning is really helpful and will continue to be very helpful as you're looking at the assignments to endorsements. Okay, so I'm gonna stop for just a second because I see there are at least a couple questions. So the steps to get to the qualified teaching staff. So it's myschooldata.com, and then along the top header is dashboards and then parent dashboard. That will open a map of Michigan and a little text box where you can start typing the name of the school or school district you're interested in. It is by building, so you would have to look at each of your buildings separately, but typing in the district name will give you a list of all of those buildings in the district. And then from there, it is on the left-hand side of the page. If you click on staff data, at the bottom is qualified teaching staff. If you haven't looked at the parent dashboard at all, though, I would really recommend checking some of those things out. There are some very cool metrics that we have been putting out, particularly related to staffing, that can help, again, identify those reporting issues versus staffing, like true staffing or placement issues. So like even looking at the ratio of students to instructional staff and teacher years of experience are things that can be indicative of like missing a subset of employees. So. All right, so with that, I'm sure that there are questions about reporting and I haven't scrolled through the chat. So just like Braden, I will be looking at the chat while Caitlin is sharing about the audit impacts, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end.
Okay, so what does all of this mean in terms of an audit? Appropriate placement is important to auditors. Brandon, you can go to the next slide. Appropriate placement is important to auditors because it can be found in the definition of class for FTE or membership, which requires the teacher to be appropriately placed. Appropriate placement is typically thought of to be for grade and subject placements. Of course, we know that there's changes in this upcoming school year, and we'll get to that later. But in terms of the new teacher credential verification report tool that Caitlin Groom covered, this is going to be very helpful for districts and auditors to work through placements before the count period begins. However, after count day, the auditors will begin their audit. And if a placement was not appropriate during the count period, deductions could be made as a result during the desk or field audits. It is important to note that this new reporting tool doesn't solve every single placement issue out there. There will be still some instances with red flags that the system or auditor may not be able to resolve for a variety of reasons. If the auditor is unable to determine if the placement is appropriate with all of the information provided that we've discussed today, any issues or questions should be referred to OEE, the Office of Educator Excellence. So I've included some contact information here, or you can contact Braden, who's on this presentation, or the MD-Educator Help email address too. But typically for auditors, we refer you to Katie Schmidt-Connect from the Office of Educator Excellence, and I've included her information on this slide. And you get bonus points if you can pronounce her name. Next slide. Okay, so as I said, when are we really looking to implement some of these changes? We thought auditors were going to have to look for grade and subject in the upcoming school year, but with the signing of the recent state aid budget, this has been pushed back another year. That's good, it gives us more time. So for this 22-23 school year, auditors will only be required to make membership deductions for those placements that are incorrect at the grade level. However, that does not mean that Section 163 has gone away. So if an inappropriate placement that includes subject area has been discovered by an auditor, OEE, or anyone calling in with a complaint, yes, that happens, the district should be aware there could be a salary deduction. As previously discussed in this presentation, districts should obtain permits as necessary to avoid salary deductions for this 22-23 school year. When membership is eventually brought into consideration for the subject area component, auditors will make deductions for each course taught by the teacher, and the deduction will be limited to the period of noncompliance, as is currently done for grade level violations. All right, here's what we're looking at in section 6, sub 8. I'll read the definition of class for each year to show the delay and hopefully help you all prepare for the future. So it says, for purposes of this subsection, class means either of the following as applicable: a period of time in one day when pupils and an individual who is appropriately placed under a valid certificate, substitute permit, authorization, or approval issued by the department are together and instruction is taking place. Note, this has that appropriate place language. So they've added the subdivision does not apply for the 21, 22, and 23 school years. Instead, for the 21, 22, and now this upcoming 23 school year, auditors take note that a class is a period of time in one day when pupils and a certificated teacher, a teacher engaged to teach under section 1233B of the revised school code, MCL 380-1233B, or an individual working under a valid substitute permit, authorization, or approval issued by the department are together and instruction is taking place. So it's going to continue to use the old definition of a class for this current school year. However, it's still important to get familiar with the tool and all of the resources that Braden and Caitlin have discussed today. Next year will come quickly. So we know that the information in this presentation will be crucial for the next school year for membership purposes, unless the legislature determines to delay the definition for another year. That could happen. So the hope is that districts now have all the tools to begin to satisfy all of their placements appropriately, especially with the expanded definition of provider under section 21F, where in section 21F, you can look it up, 14 sub D, provider means the district, intermediate district, community college, or other third-party vendor that the primary district pays to provide the virtual course, or the Michigan Virtual University if is providing the course. Therefore, a third-party vendor may supply the teacher of record for a virtual course under section 21F when the teacher is Michigan certified and appropriately placed. This came out in a recent MDE memo, 060-22, if you're looking for some additional guidance on that. And that is all we have.